pod bay doors, please, Hal.
What?
Oh, leave me alone.
Listen, boy, I need you to do a prank for Apu.
I don't get it, man. You told me to stop pranking and I did. And you know what? I don't miss it. Without you strangling me, my throat is finally healing. I can sing again. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below.
You know what? You're right. What was I thinking? Go back to sleep.
Dad.
Yes?
Say someone were to do this prank. Would the prankster receive a later bedtime, say 9:30?
No. You know something, boy? I realized I made a big mistake. I like the new well-behaved you. I can stop saving up for that house near the prison. I never should have bought that Clockwork Orange video for his 5th birthday. I thought it would help him tell time. And now I've awoken a monster.
You awoke me too.
The pod bay doors are open. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'm your host, film critic and film historian for TalkMovieToMe.com, Doug Heller, and here with me, one of my best droogs, Jerry Dean Roberts, film critic for ArmchairCinema.com, ArmchairOscars.com, and OverThinkingOscars.wordpress.com. Jerry, how you doing?
Very, my brother.
I've got a little pain in me Gulliver.
Yeah.
So we're talking about Clockwork Orange because we had to eventually, and I apologize
we're on this damn thing about we're eventually going to get to every Stanley Kubrick movie.
Come hell or high water, I am going to make you watch Barry Lyndon again.
You're going to make me talk about Barry.
And I apologize. I did not think about this before I chose this, but it is National Women's History Month here in the United States of America. And this is one of the single most misogynistic movies ever made. So I apologize for putting this here, but it ended up working with a theme.
Well, our next movie's not any better, so...
No.
So I gotta tell you, this is not the gateway drug to Stanley Kubrick.
I disagree.
You don't give this to somebody as Kubrick 101. You don't do that, because if you do, they're very likely not going to be interested in anything else.
I'll counter that with, I think this was the third or fourth Kubrick movie I saw.
Yeah, but it wasn't the first.
No, but I think it was the first one I liked.
Okay.
I went 2001: A Space Odyssey. I saw it when I was 13. I was bored to tears. Didn't understand any of it.
I started with The Shining.
When I was 16, I watched The Shining, and I was bored to tears, and I didn't like it at all. Then I watched Clockwork Orange, and I was like, oh god, it's the same guy that did the Shining and 2001, but from the first second I was like, okay, and then I was hooked, and then I was like, okay, I'll check out more stuff. Oh, here's Dr. Strangelove, and then that kind of started me rolling down. Let me rewatch these other ones. Okay, but this one actually caught me. I mean, the filmmaking is dynamic, and
the future never looked so 60s. My God.
Sure it did. In 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in Star Trek. This is. I've always thought that the way that this is in the future is funny, because it's the future if we had stayed on track through the development of technologies through the state fairs. Or through those national, like the St. Louis Fair and the, all of those, the World Expos. If we had stayed on track and actually implemented those inventions instead of being held up by fossil fuels and capitalism,
Yeah.
I think by 1971 we would have been where Clockwork Orange is. If capitalism was still the driving force, but they still went forward with all of those technological advances, I think that's where we would be.
And I think a lot of it telegraphs where certain urban areas would be by the end of the 1970s and early and into the 80s. Because you remember all those movies where basically, and even when this movie came out, where New York was basically a violent shithole.
Oh yeah. Well,
Right.
I kind of see a direct through line from this to Blade Runner 2049 to Alien. There's a direct through line of futures right there.
And through Dirty Harry and Death Wish.
Yeah. I mean, it's just this gross consumer-based, moralless junkyard of existence.
And the human race is a shit sandwich from the top down.
Yeah.
You know, from the ground up.
There's no one in this movie is good.
No.
Not a single person. Not his parents.
Mm.
Not even the priest that's in the jail.
Not the administrators.
Not the administrators. Not the PM. Not the people in the opposition. No one in this movie is any good at all.
Not even the person who comes to him and is supposed to be the Mr. Deltoid. Not even him. Not even the man who's supposed to care about his welfare.
Right, the truant officer.
The truant officer.
I find it amazing. And this is kind of like the template that Martin Scorsese kind of ran with for Raging Bull and a few others that he made of just unlikable Taxi Driver. Nobody makes unsympathetic characters better than Kubrick and Scorsese. And
Coppola can make wretched characters likable.
True. But he can also make characters that should have been likable complete waste of time. So
right.
The thing about Clockwork Orange is it's not hard to envision.
No,
and that's
not.
The most terrifying part of it. That's why people were afraid of it.
Did you read the book?
I did.
The book has an interesting tie with the film because I don't know if you know this, but Kubrick based the book on the American version.
Right, the American version actually dropped the last chapter, which
Chapter
shows
21, yeah.
which shows Alex in a reflective change period after his Ludovico conditioning has worn off.
It's after I was cured, all right. It's after that.
It's like a year after that. And so Kubrick did not know that ending existed. And the connotations of the film versus the connotations of the full novel are very, 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 very different.
Because the book that I read was only 20 chapters long. I had the Americanized version.
Oh, I had the British version without a glossary.
No, I had the Americanized version with a glossary. Why in the hell this thing is on school reading list? I don't know, but
it was. I think that they made a mistake with mine because I think I had a summer reading assignment. Like you had to read like 3 or 4 books over the summer and going into 10th grade. And I read A Clockwork Orange. I think it was on the list. And I said, how did this get on the list?
Right.
Did anyone proofread this list? Because I had seen the movie. So I read it, And for about 4 weeks, I couldn't not talk like Alex.
Right.
I was like, in my Razdooks and my Gulliver, and I was like, I could not get that slang out of my head because I had to extrapolate and interpret all of it because there was no glossary.
The NADSAT language
Yeah.
that's in the book was an invention by Burgess by which he could get through certain ideas and phrases that would have seemed horrifying if they were said directly.
Right.
Oh, my brothers, we had it, ho, the old ultra-violence, until the crew flowed freely one by one and took a spell of the old in out, in out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like basically beat her to death until she started bleeding, and then we gang raped her.
Beat her until yeah, exactly. And he created that. I want to say it's a mix of English and German and Ukrainian or something like that. It's like Czech.
It's very heavy old school Cockney with Russian words dropped in.
Right. And Burgess was a linguist as well as a novelist. And he liked his novel, A Clockwork Orange, until it became a movie. Because then it was the only book that he was known for, and he adamantly refused to believe that it was his best novel, his best work.
Right. He didn't
grew
like
to
being
hate
known
the
for
work.
that.
Yeah, he grew to hate it because it was the only thing he was known for.
Right.
And yeah, I really wonder what would have gone with this movie if that ending had been.
It would have changed the whole texture of it.
Absolutely. I wonder if he would have even used it.
Because it would have exposed the idea that there is still an inherent good in everyone.
Right, which is why I think he would have dropped it even if he knew it existed.
The texture of the movie is there's no inherent good in everyone.
Right. It's only opportunism and instant gratification. I like I said, I don't think he would have put in the original ending.
No.
Because it's just not him. It's too optimistic.
It pulls the rug out from under what we've seen.
It pulls the teeth out of it a little bit, too.
Right. Because basically what happens in the end, if you don't know, is he has a reflexive... he goes, as you said, into a reflective state in which he walks around and he starts meeting people. One of them, I think it's Georgie.
Yeah.
He meets who has settled down, is married to a very nice girl, and
doesn't speak the NADSAT anymore because it's an outdated slang at that point.
Right. And is having spends his time with wine tasting.
Right.
And things like that. And
he grew up.
He grew up. And
Alex is still kind of... He has a gang of droogs, but his heart isn't in it.
Right. It's not the same as it was.
Right. He's noticing, he's noting that he doesn't get the same thrill, which is an indication that he is maturing. The thing to remember about the book versus the movie, more than the ending, is that he was 14 in the novel, and he was 17 in the movie.
And that's important to note because the two girls that he meets in the music shop that he then takes home and has sex with, in the book, they are 10 years old.
Yeah.
And they were drugged and they're gang raped.
Right.
In the movie, they're a little more grown and it's consensual.
Right. And
sucking on popsicles that look like penises.
Well, yes.
Phallic symbols are wall to wall in this thing. I mean,
if you thought that Dr. Strangelove was sexually suggestive, Once he got the ability to have an R rating and do whatever the hell he pleased, that was...
Listen. Sex is a massive part of Kubrick's work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Which is so funny because his works are often described as being quite sterile.
Yeah.
Yet sex is anything but.
Well, if you think about it, it's in and it's always sex that is not accepted by the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Like the idea in Strangelove that
10 women
sex
to every
is
man.
for procreation
Right.
because societal norms are broken down.
Right. Lolita.
Certainly in Lolita.
Who, she was also aged up
Right.
from the novel. Did you ever read that book?
I did.
It's a hell of a book.
Let me put it this way. I read 2001,
Me too.
The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, and Lolita all because of Kubrick.
I've read all of them because of Kubrick. Plus, I've read Tromnovel, the novel that Eyes Wide Shut is
Eyes
based
Wide
on.
Shut. Yeah.
I bought the screenplay, and it had the novel with the screenplay.
Yeah.
And so I got to read that. I've always wanted to read Paths of Glory. Never got to it.
Well, but the sexual connotations, in
All of those.
Strangelove, it's when the societal norms break down and you have to procreate to create a new civilization. Lolita, it's the forbidden, the
nymph and the
May December kind of thing.
only
The
pedophilism.
right.
It's a May December, but it's really a January kind of September.
But
kind
it's pushing New Year's.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
2001.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the sexual imagery of the space dance and all the ballet and all of that. It's all over that.
The ship itself, once they're going to Saturn.
Yeah.
Is a massive phallic symbol.
Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket is
Just
a phallic
listen to
symbol
the
by
language.
itself. Yeah. That's...
Just listen to the language. That
Get your
the
head
drill
out
sergeant.
of finger-banging old Mary Rottencrotch through her pretty pig panties.
Right. The best part of you call your mom crack at your mama's ass and that was a brown stain on the mattress.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And Eyes Wide Shut, of course. That's
Well.
that's out there by itself. But it's
you don't
always
really
these...
have to go into the symbolism of Eyes Wide Shut to get the sexuality.
It's all this forbidden sexual, I guess, I don't want to call it perversion, but sexual practices that are not acceptable to the status quo.
In some cases you could call them fetishes. In other things, mental disorders like pedophilia and rape.
But what really is a fetish anymore?
Fetishes are things you choose to do because they bring you joy. Perversions are things that you are compelled to do outside of your own will.
Even when you know it's wrong.
Right. So that's where Lolita comes in, and that's where A Clockwork Orange comes in, is that they are perversions. They get off on young children, rape. They can't really have a normal, healthy relationship with a person because the only thing that excites them is what they know they shouldn't be going after.
It's whatever gets the blood pumping. And it's either mercenary sex or raging violence.
Right. It's like that creepy scene with when Kara Sedgwick is sitting on Kevin Bacon's lap in The Woodsman, and he does his little pedophile movements with her on his lap instead of a little girl.
Yeah.
That's the level of he had to pretend that she was a little girl.
Right.
To get him and do the things that he would do when he was molesting a child, to get anywhere with her, even though he liked her, he loved her as a person. Sexually, he couldn't get there, and I don't think Alex is capable of normal sex. I think he has to rape because he's been conditioned to feel the pleasure of the violence instead of being repelled by it.
The line between sex and violence is erased.
Yeah. It's all the
It's
same
not.
thing.
It's all the same thing to him. It's whatever gets the blood pumping.
Right.
Instant gratification. It could be having sex with those women, or it could be beating that man in the alley.
Right.
It's all the same
It's all
thing.
the same.
It does not, in his mind, it does not matter.
Right.
Until it falls on him.
Mm-hmm.
Until it really kind of falls on his head, and he murders somebody. And figures out
he didn't know that he had murdered her because she was alive when he left. But he was betrayed. Yes, he did end up. She died because of the injuries that he inflicted upon her with a massive ceramic dildo. Well, ceramic penis. I don't know. Physiologically, I don't even want to envision how that would work as anything but a sculpture.
Like I said, the phallic imagery in this is just unbelievable. But then being betrayed, not really calling himself to his actions because what he does is done without thought.
Right.
It's done without and placing himself at the head of the gang by violence and beating them up.
Right, and asserting his dominance as as the proverbial alpha male, which if you actually study wildlife, does not actually happen in packs of coyotes and wolves, and in the wild, only in captivity. Does that end up actually happening? So the concept of this alpha male bullshit crap is just nonsense and idiocy.
And the captivity is there because this film takes place in a lot of tight spaces.
Oh yeah. There is. I mean, just look at the car that they're driving, that they stole when they went to home. That sequence is so early in the movie. It kind of surprised me when I rewatched it. I've seen this in the theater. I always forget how soon that horrifying singing in the rain moment happens.
It needs to show you where it needs to be early on to show you where this film is.
Right.
What I appreciate is that Kubrick gives you enough. Maybe too much.
He doesn't hold back, that's for sure.
He doesn't hold back, but we don't have to actually see the whole thing happen.
No, we don't need to see it to know that it happened, and
we've seen enough up to that point.
Right.
We've got it.
And Kubrick has always been one to, like you said, give you enough to let the scene run in your head after it's over, and you can make your own extrapolations as to how things wrapped up without him showing it to you. He does the scene so perfectly that he doesn't even need to show you an end to it.
And I think in 1971 he probably never would have been able to do that anyway because it's not necessary.
No. We
get it. And the film was controversial enough. I mean, he got death threats.
Is it still not allowed to be shown in England?
Still.
Yeah. Because it ran for a few months in England, and he heard reports that gangs were sprouting up over the country emulating Alex and his droogs, and he himself pulled it from theaters in the UK and would not allow it to be shown. That was his
Yeah.
decision, not Warner Brothers.
Right.
Which is fascinating, because this is a man that is so anti-censorship, but he was also a thinking, caring person.
Right.
That even if it cost him some money, he was not going to be known as a person that helped bring the downfall of society.
Right.
So he pulled it, and it's still, I don't know if it's not allowed to be sold on disc in the UK. Like, I know that people get it, but I think that they still have to bootleg it. Even it's not allowed to be in theaters, but I don't think they're allowed to have it in general.
Which is strange, because 50 years on,
Yeah.
you might think, okay, given what has come after that,
Listen,
given what has come in the last 10 years.
given what came in the 5 years after this got made,
Right.
I mean, even just in The Godfather the next year, the level of violence.
Or The Exorcist the year after that.
Exorcist and Taxi Driver and, well, hell, The Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter.
You know, all of that stuff.
Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So, the things that happened after this hilariously do not dull the effect of this movie whatsoever. That's how potent this thing is.
I think those controversies really spring up from not what's in the film so much as the context of the film that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why you had such a controversy. One of the reasons you had such a controversy over Last Temptation of Christ.
Right.
It's not really what's in the film, it's the context in which it takes place.
And what you think it's saying versus what it's really saying.
Right. Which is why this could be controversial and a movie like a Serbian film could not. You know,
right,
or,
and I still don't understand how people have watched
that. I don't get that. I don't.
I have heard a breakdown of it. I know people who have seen it. So it's not like I know somebody whose friend told him that they watched it. People who have seen it have described it to me, and I almost threw up.
Yeah, well, and the 35-40 minutes that I wasted watching Hostel.
Oh, I have not decided to waste any time with Hostel. I can't do torture porn.
Yeah, I did, and I was like, okay, I'm done. I don't need to see this.
The only one I've ever really wanted to take a look at is The Descent, because I've heard that is actually kind of good, but I don't really know for sure, so I never actually.
The Descent was a problem for me because I thought, because for the first half hour or so, it's a very interesting idea of a bunch of women who decide to go spelunking, and they get lost, and they're trying to figure out how to get back out. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty good movie. And then they find out that they're little mutant people living in the caves, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. You lost me.
I already know that the hills have eyes. We don't have to go over this again.
Right.
They've made too many of those as it is.
Yeah, it's like once they introduce the mutant people living in the caves, I'm like, and killing off everybody one by one. I'm like, okay, I'm done.
It would have been a better concept if there was like a serial killer that was hiding out in the caves, taking them out one by one. That would have been terrifying.
Or just being trapped in a cave and not knowing how to get out.
And people disappearing here and there, and you never really know what happened to them.
You never really know what happened to them. Fell in pits or whatever.
It would have been a good movie. It would not have been an Eli Roth movie, but it would have been a good movie.
There was an interesting movie, potentially interesting movie a couple of years ago called The Boy. And it was about a girl who takes a job as a caretaker for a little boy in a remote mansion. And turns out that the boy is a doll. And it was interesting because
I already don't want to watch the movie.
I thought, well, this is interesting. Okay, the boy died, and the parents were so grief-stricken that they made an edifice of their child as a doll, and began to live as if the child were so grief-stricken that they began to live as if the child were real, the doll were real. That's an interesting idea.
It is a fascinating premise.
It's a fascinating premise. The problem is, then the boy turns out has grown up and has been living in the walls of this house, and I'm like, okay,
That's disappointing.
yeah.
I mean, at
creepy-
least with Bruno, everything worked out.
Yeah, it's creepy vibes that the film that the film builds up. It's like, and then they just trash it. They throw it away, and it's like, okay, come on.
See, that's the worst part about contemporary horror movies. Just a quick note on that before we get back to Clockwork Orange. But contemporary horror movies have the greatest setups and the most disappointing payoffs imaginable. Is why I cannot sit and watch modern horror movies. They're just so disappointing.
Yeah, or you get this thing where it's trying once again to be The Exorcist.
Right, or
it's
trying to top The Exorcist, or it's trying to be Saw without, any of the... Look, at least 3/4 of the first Saw movie is pretty good because it's a detective movie. It's just that quarter portion that's all that blood and guts and unnecessary crap that doesn't need to be there.
And you end the movie going, well, that was unpleasant.
Well, I'm glad they're never going to make any more of these 17 sequels later.
I think they made 7 sequels to that.
I don't remember how many they made, but I know that Chris Rock rebooted it with Spiral. And
why?
I don't know. Because the premise of Saw is good.
Yeah.
The execution of the rest of it is bad.
It's terrible. Yeah.
It's the same with everything else. And this movie, I'm actually very surprised that no one has tried to remake this with the original ending.
I'm surprised nobody's tried to remake this at all. No one, I don't think anybody really has a bend to want to remake Kubrick.
No,
yet.
None of his movies have ever been remade except Lolita.
Except The Shining. And The Shining.
Well, The Shining for TV. Lolita was a theatrical feature with Jeremy Irons. Did you see that one?
I did, and it was bad.
Disturbing and creepy, and she took out her retainer before they had sex, and I almost threw up, and ugh.
You start with Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
Just start with Jeremy Irons.
Oh, Jeremy Irons is a pedophile. Oh, that's a movie I want to watch.
And then the 17-hour TV version of The Shining.
I never watched it because I never felt that Steven Weber could hold a candle to anything that Jack Nicholson even thought about doing in the movie.
I'll give him this. He's not playing Kubrick's
No, because
Jack Torrance. He's playing King's Jack Torrance. So he's trying to do something different.
He is, and I have to give him credit for that. And the little bits that I've seen of it, I appreciate him trying.
Mm-hmm.
But Steven Weber has never been a particularly charismatic actor in the first place, and to have him be somebody that goes nuts just doesn't feel right.
And when you watch it, you can't separate out Kubrick. You really can't.
No.
You cannot separate out Kubrick.
Which is why when I can't remember his name, made Dr. Sleep.
Yeah.
A couple years ago, which is a magnificent film.
I haven't seen that one.
I'll go to the mats for that one. I adored that movie. But
is it a sequel to the book or the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what the writer-director ultimately did was convince King that even though he didn't like the movie version, 90% of the people going to see Dr. Sleep would be assuming it was a sequel to the movie. So they couldn't have... At the end of Dr. Sleep in the book, they blow up the Overlook.
Yeah.
in the first one, the Overlook's not there anymore. In the movie, the Overlook does not get blown up until Dr. Sleep.
Right.
So he convinced him. He said, "Look, I'm going to do the book as close as possible, but the end has to be a sequel to the movie because no one will understand why the thing isn't there because they haven't read your book."
Yeah.
Not for nothing, Stevie, but they haven't read your book.
I read the book and I didn't like
I
it.
have read the book as well. I've read Dr. Sleep, too. Dr. Sleep was a marginally better book, but
You finally read a Stephen King book.
I did, and it was The Shining and Dr. Sleep. They're the only two I've read, and they're the only two I really care about from here out. I liked them well enough while I was listening to. I listened to the audiobooks. I liked them well enough. I probably won't ever go back to them. But the
coming back around to Clockwork Orange.
yeah.
I'm fascinated because it's funny. The first time that I saw it, I was a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
and I was
Me too.
laughing at the how ridiculous some scenes were. The sex scene with the two girls.
I thought that
It's
was
done at fast.
hilarious.
It's done in fast motion
Is.
to the William Tell overture.
Right. A sped up William Tell overture.
Yeah. Just the whole some of the performances are so outsized.
Mm-hmm.
I think as I saw it years later, I began the meaning of it began to kind of soak in, because it's what has happened to society and what do we do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And since we're all the human animal, no one is really going to come up with a viable solution on how to fix this problem.
Right.
In the idea that he is arrested, jailed, and then chosen for this experiment to correct
Quote unquote.
human behavior. That is the Clockwork Orange.
Right. Right. Because an orange doesn't go into a clock, or things will get jumped
Well,
up.
I think I found out the title is Old Cockney, as queer as a Clockwork Orange. Queer meaning strange.
Mm-hmm.
But finding out that it's not a real viable solution, because what's really interesting to me is they come up with this idea of making him meek and mild by giving him drugs and giving him experiments. But then
they're
government
conditioning him.
But then the government flushes all that down the toilet because, hey, there's an election coming.
Yeah, well. See, the thing that I've always thought was the central irony is the violence in which they perform on him to take the violence out of him.
Right.
It's counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Making him nauseous at the thought of violence and sex makes him literally unable to function in a society that is violent and sexy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly where they were at that point. Can you imagine how he would have felt if he would have walked into the Karuva Milk Bar after his Ludovico technique training?
Yeah, he would have been rendered into a coma.
Yeah. I mean, and the way that Alex is ultimately treated, it's funny that you can actually consider him a victim, because he is. He's a victim by the end of it. He is a victim of a lot of other people's notions of what the world should be and how he should function within it.
You can also see where it begins at home
Oh, absolutely.
because his parents are so meek.
And basically just neglectful to the point of, oh, well, if this is what he's doing, this is what he's doing. We can't
Right.
do anything about it
Right.
because we don't want to upset it.
Right.
It's hilarious that kind of parenting actually took off in the 90s.
Right. The kind of parenting is happening now. Just the idea that he doesn't have he doesn't have boundaries or structure
He doesn't have a moral compass either.
or a moral compass.
Because his parents are so hands off, they're not imparting any of their values in him. They just assume that he will have them because they have them.
Right.
And it's that kind of neglect
Mhm.
that it could have pushed him in one of two ways. It did push him in one of two ways. He could either act out the way that he did, or the neglect could make him retreat into himself and be an introvert and think that even if his parents didn't really have any time for him, that nobody else would either.
Mm.
He went the violent route because that's what the climate of his of the society at that point was. He didn't make it that way. He just survived in it.
Yeah.
And
he got off on it.
Right. Because that's kind of what was wanted at that point. And it's fascinating that the whole first half is him dealing death and violence to people. And the second half of the movie is people dealing violence upon him.
Right.
It's the setup and then the comeuppance. And
it's you reap what you sow.
Right. And it's very uncomfortable to watch him getting his comeuppance because if you remove who he is and what he did, and it's just a person, and you don't really expect that the police treat regular people any different than Dim ended up going after Alex when he was a cop. In the book, I think it's Dim and the head of the other gang that had that rumble with.
Right.
And in
the
movie, it's Georgie, which is funny because it's Georgie at the end of the book who's moved on. He didn't become part of the Brute Squad.
Right. But it's interesting because I would love to know what that side of the story was because somehow the gang members were all offered a position with the police.
I think what happened is the government that was in charge at the time, which I'm going to be honest, both ideologies that seem present in the movie seem both to be very, very right wing.
Yeah.
Like there's not a left wing versus right wing.
No, there's not.
The writer you assume is on the left. And the government was so bad to you. This treatment is violence in and of itself, and until he realizes that Alex is the person that ruined his life.
Yeah.
And then he becomes another pawn.
Yeah.
So it feels like both opposing forces are equally totalitarian conservatism. It's just
there's not a good side to this.
right, right.
There's not a ray of sunshine in this whole
There's
movie.
not.
I mean,
There's not.
there is for him, because at the end of the movie he can go back to doing what he was doing before.
Right.
And most likely will.
Right.
And it's a cycle.
Mhm.
Goes back and forth. But knowing what you know about the book, about this chapter 21, it's interesting because at the end of the movie, you're sitting there thinking, okay, is it going to be the same for him
Yeah.
when he goes back out and tries to do it again? It does alter your thinking about how the movie ends, because when you watch it without reading the book, the ending is an implication that here we go again.
Right.
And he's going to go back out and he's going to find another group of guys.
And he's going to be
do the same
even
thing
worse because
Right.
he's been pardoned by the prime minister, and he could do whatever the hell he wants.
Right.
And that's a more terrifying concept, personally, than having him just become disillusioned because he grew up and realized that there's more to life than what he was doing in his youth.
And the ending allows a fantasy version. The very last shot allows a fantasy version of him having sex and rolling around with a woman while being applauded by the upper class in their top coats and top hats.
Right.
And that it's now a permissiveness
because,
to do whatever I want to do.
Because all of these things were done to him. And now even, the government that did it, they're like, oh, well, we recognize our mistake and everything's fine and you're going to be our poster boy.
Sorry.
And, yeah, it just looks like, he will be praised from then on for doing these actions because it is an overcoming of the violent personality destruction of the Ludovico technique. So it's kind of like saying, hey, he was able to overcome the worst thing that ever happened to him and go back to being a normal, healthy kid who, then will go and do the same thing that he did before.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing that was Kubrick's theme all the way through. Is this societal norms, the status quo, and the technological advances will never overthrow the basic human animal within.
And
that has been all along, that's been the through line through all of his films.
And not only that, but it takes that the human animal is still there and unconquerable, and uses all of those things that are trying to obliterate the human animal as dehumanizing and making it more possible for us to devolve into those animalistic behaviors.
Right.
So his and the theme of dehumanization is in Kubrick is best, I think, displayed in Full Metal Jacket.
I was going to say that.
You see Joker fall all the way down.
Yeah.
And lose his humanity by the end. And
you see Gomer Pyle go through his reverting into an animalistic manner.
Yeah.
But
here, the end implies that animalistic behavior will be accepted and applauded, sought after this. Whereas all of the other ones, it's basically saying, maybe you don't want to do this.
Right.
Clockwork Orange does not end with, maybe you don't want to do this. It ends
Right.
with, yeah, it might be fun.
No matter how much you press it down, you're never gonna get rid of
Exactly.
the basic human instinct.
Exactly. And the notion of society and civility falls away once you realize that we're all just animals.
And the movie does suggest that it starts at home.
Oh, yes.
The movie very much suggests that it starts at home.
It almost blatantly says it, as far as Stanley Kubrick ever blatantly said anything in his films.
Right.
That's pretty blatant.
Yeah.
That their apathetic parenting
Mhm.
created this monster.
Right.
And it's interesting that they are never held accountable for it. They are never made responsible for it. There's never even an implication that they might be the reason.
Mhm.
Which is even more fascinating because, as we know, parents became the scapegoats of youth violence in the 80s and 90s. Oh, it's the parents' fault. And
But where's
sometimes it
Mom and
was.
Dad?
Sometimes
You
it was. Other times it was, just those kids. And
My upbringing was simply this: we stayed home.
yeah, we did too.
We stayed home, and my mother and father were. They did discipline us when we did something wrong. Discipline wasn't a reaction to anything because my parents realized that, first of all, we're children.
Mm-hmm.
We make mistakes because that's what childhood is for. It's for learning how to become a functioning adult.
I've always marveled at the parenting that you see in some movies and shows where they're just like, oh, you're a waste of space, you don't do anything right, and it's just like you've never given them a chance to.
Yeah.
They don't think they can do anything right because they've been told by you their entire lives that they can't do anything right.
Right.
How are they going to overcome that and then start doing things right? It's not going to happen.
No, it's not. We were, like I say, punished when we did something wrong. But at the same time, in between that was a lot of love and a lot of attention.
Mm-hmm.
It was letting kids be kids, but at the same time spending time with us, talking to us, getting to know us,
Mm-hmm.
and not having that separation.
Right.
And correcting us on certain things,
Right.
on certain ideas. That's the environment I grew up in.
So,
And
yeah, it's hard to imagine growing up as Alex did.
yeah.
Um,
It's very easy to
Wow.
imagine growing up as Alex did, just being able to walk out the door and just go and do whatever the hell you want to and come and go as you please.
yeah, I knew a few kids like
Now
that.
the actor Malcolm McDowell was 27 at the time. The character in the book was 15.
Mm-hmm.
I was just sitting here, as you were talking earlier. I had an image in my mind of what this film would be like with a lead actor who was 15 years old.
Or with a
And I
lead actor
thought-
that looked like he was 15 years old, like, say, Timothy Chalamet.
Right. Somebody who was just a little bit younger, because at this age, at the age that Malcolm McDowell is, looks like he's in college.
Right. He looks like a very young adult, like 18, 19, 20s. He at least looks very young. That he could be in, like, his last year of school.
Which is why it was a shock that he was still in school.
Yeah.
I and the truant officer was coming around. I'm like, he's like 20.
Yeah. England has different rules, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's fascinating that I want to talk about the music.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating that Kubrick,
Ludwig van.
yes, he's using classical music.
Mm-hmm.
Something that is often associated with class and high culture,
Mm-hmm.
and good breeding and good education. And here is this violent little shit monster
Mm-hmm.
who is reduced to tears by classical music.
Yeah.
And he loves it. It's an antithesis. It's basically saying you can't account for people's tastes and assume that because they like one thing, they're going to be a certain way.
Well, there's also this, and maybe this connects and maybe it doesn't. The music of Mozart and Beethoven was seen during its time to be very revolutionary,
Right.
and very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Figaro.
Yeah. Maybe that's the date. Maybe that's the connection.
Maybe.
It was rebellious because, and we were talking a little. I guess we were talking a little bit about this last time. Is that when you have any youth culture will adapt and develop, or will be attracted to its own music,
Right.
to its own, to whatever music is speaking to you,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
With me, it was the rock of the '80s. To someone else, it may have been rap, it may have been gangster rap, it may have been.
For me, it was the rock and roll of the 50s and 60s and
Right.
70s.
And I'm just saying, music speaks to you when you're this age.
Yes, it does.
And this music speaks to him.
And it's funny because, you would expect him to be listening to angry music.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1971, there wasn't really a whole lot of angry music in existence.
I don't know. Especially the stuff that came out of the '60s.
I would even.
The Who was pretty. I don't know. The Who was pretty.
The Who has an edge, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But comparing it to something even 8 years later, when punk hit the scene,
Mm-hmm.
if this had been made
3 years later with Kiss.
Yeah, well, Kiss looked a lot more edgy than they ever sounded. I don't like
Kiss
that
looks
band.
like Madonna. Kiss looks like Metallica sounds.
Exactly. Yes. And Kiss sounds to me.
It sounds like party rock.
Well, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
I've never been a big fan of Kiss.
I haven't either. I'm an admirer of Kiss.
That's going even farther than I. But it's.
Here's a band that that at least stayed together.
Well, yeah. In 1971 was really.
What was popular? What music was popular then?
The glam rock was starting. Led Zeppelin.
Like Gary Glitter?
Yeah, Led Zeppelin. David Bowie was coming into prominence, especially in England in the late 60s and early 70s. I think Ziggy Stardust was 71 or 72. Led Zeppelin was doing their kind of most creative work right in 70, 71, 72, 73, 74.
When did Ozzy happen?
Late 60s.
Black Sabbath.
Yeah, well, maybe mid-70s. But all of this stuff was on the horizon. Kubrick didn't have any of this to work with yet.
And this movie also, it should be said, takes place in the future. An undetermined future, because it never tells you exactly when it's taking place.
It's the present future.
Right.
It's everything that's now, but horrifying.
Right.
Well, more horrifying.
Or somehow Beethoven has become retro.
Right, like, but I would have loved to know what the rest of them listened to.
Yeah.
Because him listening to Beethoven and classical music always felt to me like me listening to Bob Dylan as opposed to Three Doors Down.
Yeah.
Or 311 or whatever Sublime or whatever band was popular when I was a kid. I don't know because I didn't listen to it. It was no idea.
Isn't it interesting though in England how all of that glam rock transforms in the 1980s to become, I mean, in the 80s in England, it was pop bands. You couldn't throw a rock in the 1980s without hitting a British pop band. I mean,
And it was all that terrible synth-based.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, it was Tears for Fears and Mike and the Mechanics and all of that stuff. All that stuff you hear when you go to the grocery store.
Yeah. The oldies.
Yeah. I go to the grocery store and I hear Mike and the Mechanics and I'm like, when did this happen?
I have been in 3 different places in 3 different months and have heard the Kinks Come Dancing on the radio wherever I was. That's from the early 80s. I love the song. I love the Kinks.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have expected to hear that on the radio, let alone 3 times in 3 different places. Like it was amusing to me that, this stuff is now old.
Yeah. Classic.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Oh, it's the classic rock. I got into an argument when I was in college because I was like, no, I love classic rock. And they started naming bands from the 70s. I said, that's not classic rock. I started naming like people from the 60s and the 50s, and they're like, no, that's oldies.
Classic rock is like, to me, is like the Who. And,
Right, the bands from the 60s, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Dylan, the Kinks, the Zombies, all of those groups. That's classic rock to me. I wouldn't have even considered Led Zeppelin to be classic rock in the early 2000s because they were too recent to me.
Right.
Or even Tom Petty. But by then, their earliest works were considered classic rock. I'm like,
I heard Tom Petty on an easy listening station. I was like, wait,
that
what?
Hurts.
Yeah, that hurt.
Hurts.
Like, really?
Ooh.
And it was free falling. I was like, okay, no.
Jeez, no.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a few things that he did could be considered that. A few things off of Wildflowers, maybe...
Or Great Wide Open or something.
Yeah, Into the Great Wide Open.
Yeah.
The stuff that he did with Jeff Lynne and the band.
Yeah.
That record, but that's mostly Jeff Lynne's fault. Now, Free Fallin' was also produced by Jeff Lynne.
Right.
Of ELO fame.
Right.
So once you realize that and you hear the backing vocals, you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's Jeff Lynne.
ELO is another one of those album cover bands.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you remember the album covers before you really remember the music.
Oh yeah. Them.
Journey was an album cover band.
Yes. Tangerine Dream. Led Zeppelin became an album cover band.
Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
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 The Beatles even became an album cover band. Just that generation of the late '60s and early to mid '70s.
I think
when,
that they are more taken for
probably not the
granted.
Beatles.
I don't think that the Beatles are album cover band. I think that because they've become so ubiquitous, they've stopped being considered by people of a certain age, probably coming in around my age or a little younger. It's so bad at this point that a number of years ago, Paul McCartney did a collaboration with Kanye West, and Twitter thought that Kanye had discovered a new artist.
Mm.
And they're like, no, it's Paul McCartney. He was in the Beatles. What's the Beatles?
Yeah. Oh, God.
It's like, no, this guy's been doing shit since the 60s. He's not new. You've heard him before. I know
you've heard him. Even if you didn't know who he was, you've heard him before.
Every Christmas, they've heard Simply Having a Wonderful Christmas Time, whether they wanted to or not, and frankly, I can't imagine wanting to. But Paul McCartney doesn't have too many duds, but...
But it's a perennial. It's a perennial. But
the way that classical music is used here is antithetical to every other depiction of classical music in movies, because he collaborated with, was it Wendy Carlos, whom he then got back to do The Shining. But
where he used Berlioz,
right? And the use of the electronica adaptations of the Ninth Symphony, Beethoven's Ninth, and things like that, made it feel as new as it would have been if he was rocking out to the Who and the Kinks.
Right.
Which is...
And it's nothing new to Kubrick, because Kubrick uses classical music all the time, because it's the best kind of music to get that kind of emotion.
Well, half of the time he was just using it as temp tracks, and then decided that whatever got composed for him wasn't as good as his temp tracks, so he just used the temp tracks.
You can't find anything better. You really can't find anything better.
I compel you to find a better theme for Barry Lyndon than Sarabande.
Or in the Blue Danube in 2001.
Exactly.
Or in Eyes Wide Shut. You try to find something else, and you try to find a composition. Hans Zimmer, as brilliant as he is, couldn't do it.
No. No. I don't even think somebody the level of, like, John Williams or James Horner could have even done it.
Right.
Kubrick.
These were the masters. You can't really overcome the sound of and the meaning and the tone of what the structure of what they had.
Right. And Kubrick rarely had an original score.
Right.
Or soundtrack. If there's any music at all, there's that little bit of music in Dr. Strangelove, but it's a generic non-tune.
And there's that score that runs through Eyes Wide Shut that is so lazy and so it's not even...
What is it, the Grigorov? Is that his name?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And it's not pulse pounding at all.
Right, no.
And it speaks to how casual the sex is in that film.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I think the Beethoven speaks to how it speaks to his testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
When you take Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, we take Beethoven's Fifth and you put it with him having sex with these girls or beating somebody up.
Mm-hmm.
it fits with the testosterone in the blood in the blood going.
Yeah, yeah.
And the anyway, yeah.
I, it just, I marvel every time I see this movie because there's no.
I feel like I shouldn't be watching.
Exactly.
It.
I feel like I'm bad for liking the movie because there's nothing enjoyable about the film at all, except how expertly crafted and how he uses nothing but negative emotions to reinforce the need for positivity.
And once again, it is not Kubrick 101 at all.
Yeah, you're probably better off starting somebody off with like The Shining or Doctor Strangelove. Yeah, or even Full Metal Jacket.
Some of the imagery in this, though, I wonder how the movie would have come off if they had used Burgess's imagery. The cod pieces were... the cod pieces in the book were not these gray sort of jockstrap.
Cartoonish.
Yeah. Sort of almost like African thing, African masks or something.
Yeah.
They wore their outfits, I think, were black.
Mm-hmm.
But Malcolm McDowell decided, it's more like a cricket uniform.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he has.
Yeah.
But just some of the imagery in it is fascinating. In the scene where they break into that house, the home invasion, they're wearing different masks.
Yeah. Like
one of them is Winston Churchill, and I think one of them is Elvis. They're all different masks. They're kind of like the presidents in Point Break. Yeah. That might have been interesting. I think the phallus works better.
Yeah.
The phallic nose works better.
Right. Viddy well, little brother, viddy well.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to make you watch us beat and rape your wife.
Right.
And then we're going to cripple you.
Yeah.
And then David Prowse lives in his house. I don't really...
Yeah, Darth Vader lives in his house, yeah. He's his hospice caretaker.
Right.
Young David Prowse. This was like bodybuilding.
I've always thought that it was... It always felt to me like they had more than just a caretaker relationship.
You think so?
Yeah. Just the ease in which they're together and everything, it feels more like a romantic relationship than a professional relationship to me. It always has. Obviously not that there's anything wrong with that.
The funny thing about David Prowse is when you look at him in this movie from the neck down, it's bodybuilder. When you look at him from the neck up, it's Dave Clark 5. Right.
It's that guy in the library going shh.
We're trying to rain.
Yeah, exactly. He is a fascinating visual dichotomy.
Right.
And then there's that end. They put him through that Ludovico technique with the iconic.
Oh God, that makes me cringe.
The eyelid holders, and just the drops and that whole sequence and what happens to him after when he finally goes back to home.
Yeah.
And he realizes that he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And is afraid of being discovered. And he's like, oh, we were wearing masks. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And he absent-mindedly starts singing in the rain in the bathtub, which causes Patrick McGee to go into an insanity death spiral.
He has some facial expressions in this that are just fascinating.
Yeah.
and very Kubrickian. Not just that, but when he's sitting down to dinner, food, all right.
More wine.
And he's just looking at him, this lowbrow look that he's giving him in the back of the scene.
Yeah.
Now, when I said I saw this as a teenager and I was laughing, this is the stuff I was laughing at. Just his expression and all.
See, I was the exact opposite. When I saw it, I was fascinatedly horrified, or horrifyingly fascinated, at just the. I'll confess that I don't think I caught every. I didn't really understand the implications of it even after I read the book until I was well into my 20s and 30s even, when I finally saw it in the theater. There were even scenes that I was watching when I was rewatching it for this that I was like, oh, I don't remember that scene being in there. Yeah. It was like, oh.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, hey.
Hey.
The
And I remember the first time I saw it, when he got out of when they let him back out, and I can't remember the first person he runs into. But I kind of, in my head, I understood what the rest of the movie was going to be. It was going to be him running into all of the people that he had.
Right. It was the exact opposite of and the people that he encounters them in the same order that we see in the beginning.
I didn't notice that.
Because the first people he goes to are his parents.
Yeah, and they kind of shame him.
Right, out of the house.
Yeah.
And then the first thing that happens to him is the bum that he beat up gets other bums and beats him up. And then he meets up with the former Droogs, because the next thing that happens after that guy is that big rumble. So then he's put into, and then they go to home, and then, all of that stuff kind of happens in the same order that it happens in the beginning, just instead of him victimizing, it's him being victimized.
Right.
The movie is two sides of the same coin.
And running into a long-running series of ironies.
And yeah, I find the movie endlessly fascinating and
just not endlessly comforting.
No, it's not one of those. It's not a comfort movie. And if it is your comfort movie, seek help.
You need help.
Seek professional help. There's nothing wrong with you. You just maybe need to talk about it.
Right.
Whatever happened to you. I was in college, and I was doing my laundry in the laundry room in the dorms, and I saw a girl reading this. And I said, "Oh, that's a great book." And she goes, "Oh, yes, it's an old friend." And I was terrified.
God.
Well, it was like the fourth or fifth time she'd read it or more. It was like, oh boy, that's...
Well, no, I read it twice.
I only read it once.
It twice.
Well, no, that's not true. I read it kind of twice. What happened is, when I was a senior in high school, in my English class, we were supposed to do a character analysis. Right, and we were supposed to get literary criticisms of this character, and kind of create a composite character sketch out of the academic writing that had been previously done. I chose Alexander Delarge, last name invented for the movie. I found nothing reference material-wise for it. So when my teacher said...
Did you have the internet?
Sort of. It was 1999.
early form of the
98.
internet.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So not really.
So you wouldn't have had a massive
I tried
information pool.
searching, and I found no character studies of Alexander Delarge, which I found odd because
I mean, nowadays you can go on YouTube and you just find Alex Delarge analysis,
right,
and then
but
somebody's done a video on it.
back then we didn't have such things.
Back in them days.
And so I turn in my bibliography, and it is composed of the Anthony Burgess novel and the Stanley Kubrick movie.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I cleared it with him. I said, I can't find anything else. Can I just do this on my own? And he said, sure. I turned that in, and he wrote on it, this better be good. I wound up using the book and the movie as a reference point for something like 1,000-word essay on Alexander Delarge and the connotations of the novel and the film. I got an A+ for it, which is amazing because I wrote it mostly the day it was due.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Because it had to be turned in by 3:00, and I was in the computer lab at 1:30 still typing.
Yeah. Oops.
But there is precious little out there that actually goes into the meaning of him outside of what he represents in culture.
Yeah.
Not what he was kind of intended to represent, which is the antithetical way that we should be the anti-future. We shouldn't be heading in this direction, and he's telling us about this so that we don't go in that direction, and we misinterpreted it and then went in that direction.
Yeah.
The movie's bottomless.
It is.
But it is...
It is a spiral that you can go down and down and down if you actually choose to go down and down and down with this. Because it's not a hopeful thing at all.
No, it's about as bleak as a Russian novel. Basically. I think that's all I have.
That's all I got.
So, next episode...
Back to Kubrick.
Well, maybe. The way that we're going to be ordering it, it might end up being Singing in the Rain, so that we have a sound and a fury and a sound and a fury.
Right. Because
I think Singing in the Rain directly following A Clockwork Orange is it's a mental downshift without really putting in the clutch. So
you have to talk into the bush.
I might structure it differently. We'll find out when I post everything. But we have Singing in the Rain coming up and Full Metal Jacket.
You have to talk into the bush. Well, I can't make love to a bush.
Oh, wait. Yeah. And I can't stand him.
I can't stand him.
I can't stand him. That's what I said. Oh, I love that movie so much. And it is a jarring kick to the nuts when you try to watch it right after Clockwork Orange.
Anything is a jarring kick to the nuts after you watch Clockwork Orange.
Probably true, except maybe Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Full Metal Jacket is my alternate to Elvis.
Yes, and what an alternate.
Yeah.
So that's what we have coming up for the rest of March. We're still kind of nailing April and May down.
I keep forgetting about April.
I know you do, because I keep asking you about it.
Well, I'm so focused on what we're doing in May, because in May we're going to talk about some of the films that Oscar overlooked. I say that literally 5 days before the Academy Awards.
Well, the two I'm picking, I don't think got nominated for anything.
Okay. Anyway. That's all I got.
You can find all of our back episodes at the podbaydorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can listen to us on iTunes and YouTube. Hit the like, subscribe, and notifications buttons on that. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. You can put up notifications for that too, know when we tweet. Copy and paste that handle over at Patreon. It's the same one over there. We thank you very much for listening, and the Pod Bay doors are now closed.
The mission has been completed.
Who on earth could that be?
I'll go and see. Yes? Who is it?
Excuse me, missus, can you please help? There's been a terrible accident. My friend's in the middle of the road, bleeding to death. Can I please use your telephone for an ambulance?
I'm sorry, but we don't have a telephone. You'll have to go somewhere else.
But missus, it's a matter of life and death.
Who is it, dear?
There's a young man here. He says there's been an accident. He wants to use the telephone.
Well, I suppose you better let him in.
Well, wait a minute, will you? I'm sorry, but we don't usually let strangers in the middle.
Right, Pete, check the rest of the house. 10. I'm singing in the road, just singing in the road. What a glorious feeling. I'm happy again. I'm laughing at clouds so dark up above.